Good morning. Have you ever struggled getting sharp photos? Despite doing all the right things, they just come out soft. You use the tripod, use the right shutter speed, maybe the good lens, but they're still soft. Well, in this video, I'm going to be sharing 5 things you need to look out for that secretly make your photos soft, although you're doing all the perfect things technically. And make sure you watch until the end because I will reveal something, a little secret that you absolutely need to know, especially if you're seeking those sharp photos. That may change completely how you're going to look at your work. So if you're ready, let's get started. Woo! Sharp photos, big topic. Let's get right into it because there's a lot to cover here. The first thing you need to understand is that there's technical sharpness and that there is perceived sharpness. And those two things are not necessarily the same. Let me explain. How you look at an image and getting that pro result that you want where it looks like this basically is what we call perceived sharpness. And getting a photo that is just sharp doesn't necessarily give you that perceived sharpness. So let's get right into it. Let's start with number 1. High ISO kills micro contrast. So even if an image is technically sharp, a high ISO can reduce the image's bite. It flattens the tones, adds grain, and reduces that pop that we associate with sharp photos. So basically your perceived sharpness is completely reduced. And if you look closely, there is that grain that's here, and the micro contrast is different. There is artifacts of different colors and different tones that are added because that ISO is going up. This one was shot at ISO 10,000, and although it's still very sharp, we're losing a little bit of that micro contrast details, and you can tell a little bit here in the darks. If we had shot this at a much lower ISO, all this would lose less of those details, of that micro contrast you see in the hair and in the skin that you can really perceive easily in this shot. So the higher your ISO, the less of that micro contrast you will feel. And something to know also is that micro contrast is usually linked to your lens and the coating it has. But what you want to remember is that some lenses feel more clinically sterile and others have a very deep richness in the details and how it basically makes you experience it as a viewer. And that's the kind of lenses that you want to go for. They're not necessarily the latest and best. Sometimes old glass has that really deep richness. So because of all that, your image can be sharp, but it doesn't feel sharp. Now, the second thing you need to know and check for is how much contrast you have in your image. Because sometimes it's not about the lens, it's not about your ISO, but it is simply about how much contrast you have. And the more contrast in your image, and the easier it will be to see the edges of the different objects in your image. Look at my frame now, how I'm being lit, and what happens if I turn on the light? You see, your perception of how sharp and how crisp I am is completely different, right? When it comes to the scene lacking contrast, we have a very drastic example here where you can see that the animal, the hyena, is actually in the same tones as the background, so it ends up blending in, which, yes, the animal is sharp, but your perception is actually that this image is a lot less crisp, let's say, than this image. But if you zoom in, both images are sharp, it's just that our perception is completely different. That one is going to pop a lot faster, so if you're trying to see a subject, it's pretty obvious which one you will go for. Example with this one also, we have a dark background, or subject is lit up with light, and on top of that wearing red. The contrast is really stark with the background, so it feels that the person is very, very crisp. And here is an example where it's actually a little harder. The animal really blends in with tones and colors with everything that's around it. So if I wanted to really make that animal look crisp, I would have to have it on a different background. So it is sharp, but it won't look as sharp as animals on the darker background where the contrast, the perceived contrast is much, much higher. You end up with the same thing between this bird and this bird, where it's clear that, and even the three of them, if you look at it, you will see them more or less fast. And the speed at which you're going to be able to perceive the animal is going to influence how sharp you experience the photo to be. Now, before we move on to the third point, I wanted to welcome you. If you don't know me, my name is Pierre Lambert. I'm a travel and adventure photographer, and I'm sharing tutorials and photography videos on this channel. So make sure you leave it a big thumbs up if you like it, subscribe if you want to learn more, go deeper, and know that every single photo that you see have been edited with my Lightroom presets. I literally use them every day, and so can you. They're available with the link in the description, so feel free to grab them to save time and dial in a style you love very quickly. Oh, and if you want to learn with me on the field, check out in the description if there's a workshop coming up or not. I'll link it below if there is. But with that being said, let's be aware of the third point. It is simply that if everything is sharp, nothing is sharp. What do I mean by that? There needs to be a certain kind of visual hierarchy when we're looking at an image. And if you have your whole scene that is sharp, for example, in the crowd, in the street, it's going to be very hard to make up what is your subject and what you want to pop in that image. This is a good example for everything is sharp, then nothing is sharp. As you can tell here, it's very easy and clear to see the subject. And maybe even if it's sharp at just one little bit, it looks very crisp in a way. But here, we are losing what is supposed to be sharp because everything is sharp. So what you have to understand is that our eyes need a certain visual hierarchy to understand what is sharp and what isn't. So when you look at that photo, sure, technically it's going to be sharp, but this one is going to pop more. Whenever I can make up what the subject is in my frame very quickly, that feels a lot sharper than when I have the information of the whole image and everything is completely sharp and I'm completely lost looking at it. Fourth things to pay attention to is going to be our focus. Missing the focus by just a little bit can really change the way you're going to experience an image. Let me show you that difference, and especially in portraits. Now, something that can ruin an image very easily is missing the focus on the eyes and having it done, for example, on the lips. And that can happen very easily, especially if you're shooting at f1.2, f1.8. That happens. It's kind of something as a portrait photographer you want to be extremely careful of. Here it's not a huge problem because we're not zooming in that much on the face, but if it was a very tight portrait like this and we missed the focus on the eyes by just a little bit, it would have a very big impact. Like you can tell on these photos, for example, where if we zoom in, what happens is that I missed the eye just by a little bit. It got focused just at the back. And what happened is that, or at the front. And what happens is that it kind of ruins your shot without you noticing. And you're looking at three images and you're like, I feel like one is a little bit less crisp than the other one. And you're not sure why. Well, sometimes zooming in can really show you what was happening and why that happened, you know? So even here, I love this portrait, but if you look, the focus was done here on the eyebrows and the eyelashes versus the iris. So it applies for portrait, but it also applies for wildlife and for anything you're taking photos of. So make sure, even if you have to go in full manual to get your focus right, make sure your focus, although it will be sharp in your image, is where you want it to be exactly. And now the fifth point you want to be checking for is lens hood. Lens hood can make your photos sharper. Why? Because they will increase, or they will preserve, they will protect the contrast of your lens by avoiding that direct light hits it on the sides and creates flare and thus reduces the contrast in your image. Let me show you exactly what I mean on those photos. These two photos really show us the difference also of having a soft light versus a direct light in creating the contrast that will give you that sense of sharpness. And we'll talk about it again, why this one is so much softer. But just the fact that you have that soft light versus the direct light, your perception of sharpness has changed. And when you shoot against the light, what happens also is that you lose a little bit of contrast. If you look at the hat and the black in the hat compared to the next photo where I'm actually not getting the sunlight hitting the lens, we actually have much deeper darks. And here, when I'm shooting with the sun in my back, you can really tell how much darker it is. And this is not a question of editing, really. This is a question of when your lens is being hit directly by light, it actually softens everything, which can be great. Honestly, it's not always an issue, but if you're really trying to go for the sharpest, you want to put on the lens hood on your camera and make sure you're avoiding having light hitting directly, because it creates flare, and that flare is, as you can tell, softening everything and adding a little bit of a halo of light inside. Very important if you're trying to get those like super sharp images. You really don't want to have the light hit right like that. And this is really a great example. You can see how much sharper the face and the eye gets here rather than here, where we have a completely different dynamic in the shot. So let me know which team you're part of, lens hoods or never lens hood. I definitely move back and forth over the years. And the reason is because of this little secret, the bonus, that sharpness is not everything. There is a certain beauty of images that are not sharp, that have a little bit of a softness. It actually makes them sometimes more visually appealing. It gives them a little different mood. And I really encourage you not to get hung over the technical sharpness of your images, but really to focus on how you want a viewer to feel when they're looking at your image. And if it's a portrait and it's a little soft, maybe that's what you want the person to see when they're looking at it, a certain softness versus a clinical sharpness and too many edges. That being said, grab your cheat sheet in the description with camera settings and tips for when you go on the field. And if you want to nail your focus every time, watch this video. And if you want to bust 3 photography myths that may be holding you back, that was hard to say, watch this one. Now get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.